Want to use a PGR in your cereals but have no time for a separate pass? Manipulator PGR can be applied as early as one tiller. Just add it to your herbicide to reduce lodging, increase harvest efficiency, and maximize yields. Talk to your retailer for more info and to confirm acceptable tank mixes.
Good day, and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here on Real Agriculture for Wednesday, April the 17th. On this episode of The Word, Life Lessons. Oh my gosh, the wheat crop is advanced. Nitrogen woes, lots of discussion there. And then at the end, agronomy answers. So many cool questions coming in. Thank you for those. Keep them coming. We'll cover as many as we can. Let's go! First off, yes, last week, Thursday, Friday, the RealAg Summit. And fortunate to have Mark Gasparotto come in. Mark is a retired commander from the Canadian Armed Forces, was in Afghanistan, and commanded a battalion during Operation Medusa. Really amazing individual. And just a few things that he said that I really think should resonate with everyone. So the first one was when he was dealing with his kids, and he's a military commander, and by gosh, he wants to be right. And it was so funny. He puts a slide up of his two kids, I think aged 8 and 10, and they're going on a canoe trip, and they're both saluting him because he's got to be right. And he said, you have to choose as a leader whether you want to be right or you want to have influence. And he said, looking at my kids, would you rather be right or would you rather have influence? And my gosh, that's a really great distinction. And yes, I think we all want to have influence. And if that means once in a while we have to walk away from being right and forcing people to believe that the way we think is the right way to think, I think that's a good thing. So absolutely, try to have influence. Don't try to always be right. By the way, Wheat Pete, as much as I try to be right on the word, I often do make errors along the way. But I hope people will forgive me for that, and I hope I have a little bit of influence. That's the whole focus from this perspective. Another thing that he said, and this is very powerful. During his tenure as commander in Afghanistan, they came under enemy fire. They came under friendly fire, which is even more horrific because you don't expect it. And they did lose, I believe he said, 6 troops out of the 135 that he commanded lost their lives serving our country. And it's a really hard thing as a commander to deal with that, and you have to. It's part of the military. But he said one of the ways that he dealt with that and continues to deal with that was that he's decided every morning when he gets up, he is going to say, "Good morning" to the sun, because the sun is always there. It might be behind the clouds, but just that impetus, that mechanism of saying good morning to the sun. I don't know, you say good morning to someone, to anything, and it just lifts your whole thought process. So I think that's a good life lesson for all of us. The one other thing that I will pass along, because I found it really powerful, he went through a period where he actually was blowing up, and it wasn't physically injured, but the impact of the explosion went from his feet right through his head, and he was in shock, his vision narrowed in, all of those things that happened. And he said that the way that he got through that was with controlling his breathing. That was his training. When you get in those situations, to regain control, you have to breathe. And if you can focus on your breathing, it actually really does help your mental capacity to sort things out. And he called it box breathing. And we tried it with him in the room, and it really does have an amazing impact. So you just breathe in for the count of 4. You hold your breath for the count of 4. you exhale for the count of 4, and you hold without breathing in again for the count of 4. And then you repeat that as needed to kind of regain control of your thought process. And as we get into the spring season and lots of stresses happening, lots of things to get done, we'll get under pressure. Man, if it's starting to get to be too much, try box breathing so you can take that, whatever that is, 30 seconds, a minute, whatever it works out to be, to just regain control, let the stress level ease back a little bit, and have a better day maybe than you would otherwise. I think that's really, really important. So cool stuff. Thanks to Mark Gasparotto for that. And yeah, lots of other stuff that we could talk about, but really important stuff. Let's move on. Bad news on the horizon. Dang! Glyphosate-resistant lambsquarters has been confirmed. First time ever anywhere on the globe in Quebec, Canada. And so Sarome originally reported this. It's been confirmed by AAFC researchers in the Post. We'll link the article that Bern Tobin wrote. It's not here in Ontario yet, although Peter Sikkema, Dr. Peter Sikkema, one of our excellent weed researchers here, says that since 2010, here in Ontario, they have been dabbling, is the term he used, dabbling with glyphosate-resistant lambsquarters, but the level of resistance was so low that we were always able to control it other ways or with higher rates, and so he never officially reported it. But man, now apparently in Quebec we have one that is quite resistant to glyphosate, and it just continues to ramp up the need for herbicide rotation, for crop rotation, for multiple modes of action, for all the things we can do to avoid resistance in these various weed species. It's incredibly important. If we can't control lambsquarters, man, it's a major weed here in the province, and we always struggle with it in things like edible beans and IP soybeans. So we don't need that to start here, that's for sure. Okay, I got to move on, and let's get into more positive stuff. So yes, it rained. Dang, it rained. So what's really interesting is because this rainstorm, it's given a whole bunch of different perspectives across Ontario based on how much rain people received. So I get talking to Woody down near Dresden, less than 1 inch of rain. Perfect, just exactly what he needed, get his nitrogen in the ground, all is good. Meanwhile, up in Simcoe County, 8 inches of rain. Man, that's enough to make it like things are swimming. It is wet. I was in Bruce County scouting wheat. It is wet, wet, wet to the north. And now all of a sudden it's like, should I put the nitrogen on my wheat? Am I going to get into loss? And we will talk more about that. But what an unbelievable difference. Meanwhile, Christy Friesian out in the Peace River District of Alberta tweets out a picture yesterday, I believe it was, where there is a forest fire that has been started, and all that is between that fire, that bushfire, and their buildings is a wheat stubble field. And wheat stubble, it can burn pretty quickly too. Thankfully, the neighbors came rushing in and got water trucks there and put that fire out. It was not the disaster that it might have been, but they are so dry in the Peace River District that there's all the fire bans. It's quite a different part of the world compared to where we are at in Ontario and the rainfall that we've had here, but just points out there's massive differences across this great country of ours. Okay, I want to move on, and wowzers! What an unbelievable spring we've had from January the 1st until April the 17th today. We are doubling or even 250% more growing degree day accumulations than average. So get this, Megan Moran, the canola and edible beans specialist for the province of Ontario, found a winter canola plant in flower on April the 16th. That is unbelievably early. Sometimes we might see them on May the 10th, but April the 16th, and we have canola in flower. We have wheat that is at growth stage 31. That is first node stage. And man, that changes everything in terms of wheat nitrogen management, wheat herbicide management, wheat growth regulator management. Yesterday, walking my own wheat field, I actually found cotyledon stage lambsquarters and ragweed. And normally, I would say we never see those annual weeds germinate till it's the first week of May before we generally would see any of those weeds. Again, 16th of April, there they are. We are at least 2 weeks ahead of normal. Joanna Falling's doing a great job tracking growing degree days base zero. So base zero is, of course, what we use for wheat. It's not what we use for alfalfa or corn or soybeans. It just means 0 Celsius, by the way, when I say base zero. But growing degree days at Ridgetown, 333 accumulation as of, I believe, April the 15th versus 2023, 250. So that's quite a bit ahead of last year, which was a reasonably early year, versus the average, the 10-year average at 139. So you double 139 and you get to 280. And so even like we're just so far ahead of normal. It really is amazing. So lots of questions around nitrogen and all those things. So if you have yet to put any nitrogen on your wheat and you have advanced wheat, and maybe I better back up and just say be careful, because I said growth stage 31. We have wheat at Elora that's growth stage 31. We have wheat in Chatham-Kent that is growth stage 31. We have wheat in the London area at growth stage 31, but it's all early planted wheat. We have November planted wheat at London that is a long way away from growth stage 31. So you really need to get out and know where your wheat is at. But if you have yet to put any nitrogen on your wheat crop and you're at growth stage 31, gosh, we're sort of out of the game where it makes much sense to split apply nitrogen. We're already into the rapid uptake phase. And at least if you're going to split nitrogen, it's still an environmental win. It would still reduce the lodging potential. So I'm not saying don't do it, but you really need the big shot now. I think you need 90, 100 pounds minimum right away as soon as you can get across that field. And 2 weeks from now, you're going to put on the second application, so probably we are back to just a single application unless you're really an aggressive manager from that perspective. And so while we're talking about nitrogen, both ends of the spectrum, I have Ben and Dave saying, am I losing yield because I didn't get any nitrogen on before the rain hit, and now this wheat is so advanced? And I have Nick and Kate both saying, oh, Peter, all that rain, aren't we going to lose a whole bunch of nitrogen? So on both fronts, I think we're okay. And let me explain why. When we look at the yield loss aspect, if you have early planted wheat that has 3 to 4 tillers, Shane and I did a study on this. 2018 is when we finished that study or published the report. Dave Hooker sent me back to that report, said, Peter, dig out that data. If you have wheat that is well tillered and you delay your nitrogen application until growth stage 32, that second node, we're not there yet, that's super late to put on the nitrogen. In that study across 10 locations, intensive management, we only lost 1 to 3 bushels per acre. In many cases, we lost 0. Occasionally, we would lose 8 to 10 bushels, but on average, 1 to 3 bushels per acre. So really, we haven't lost any yield. Don't worry about that. Get the job done as quickly as you can. What's interesting is in the data set, we do have a little bit of timing of nitrogen on the late planted wheat. Man, if you plant wheat late and you don't get nitrogen there reasonably early, you lose 7 to 10 bushels per acre. More critical for early nitrogen on late planted wheat. We've talked about that before, but the data supports that. And then we go to the nitrogen loss side of things. And Nick's saying, if there's an inch of rain coming, should we even put nitrogen on the wheat because of the loss potential? And my answer immediately is, wait a minute, Nick. We put nitrogen on the wheat. It takes at least the first half an inch of rain to move that nitrogen into the soil. And on heavy clays, it might take 2/3 or 3/4 of an inch. So the first inch, give me the first inch, just because that moves the nitrogen into the soil. And by the way, Tyler out doing some nitrogen loss work with his dosimeter tubes, part of the Brant County Nitrogen Loss Project. Well, with the rainfall coming 2 or 3 days, within 2 or 3 days of the nitrogen application, your volatilization loss goes to 0. So that is a good thing from an agronomic management standpoint. But then Kate's saying, well, what about denitrification? So denitrification happens with saturated soils, and it's all about temperature, soil temperature, and the length or the duration of how wet it is. And we don't have good data on it. But my experience, and this is just my experience, it takes 2 weeks of reasonably saturated soil conditions and warm temperatures to get to the point where we have denitrified enough of the applied nitrogen that we have lost significant nitrogen and would need to top it up. That happened, I believe it was 2012 in the wheat crop, and we saw that. We had 2 weeks in late April, warm, stayed wet. So if your soil stays wet for 2 weeks and you have your full shot of nitrogen on, you might have to look at topping that up. Soil temperatures are still reasonably low, so I think it would take at least 2 weeks. But if you only got 1 inch or 2 inches, and lots of places, we got the rainfall on the weekend. By Tuesday, growers were in the field or it was drying off on the surface. That stops that denitrification loss because we're not saturated. And so I'm not really worried about a lot of loss to denitrification. I'm happy we didn't get volatilization loss. I don't think we're in bad shape. But there's lots of weather to happen from here on in. Just while we're on nitrogen, Gannon Don saying a no nitrogen test plot. He didn't charge his booms well enough. You could see the gull swings, the difference in that wheat. Yep, that's called a recirculating boom, Dan. And I know they cost some money, but boy, when you think about charging your booms, backing into fence rows or whatever, when you have herbicide in there, fungicide in there, and you have to charge the boom, environmentally, that's just not right. Recirculating booms fix that. I think we all have to get there. Brian saying, Peter, you talked about phosphorus on your wheat crop. So we did a mez trial. We went out, we spread 100 pounds of mez. Wow, what a difference. Where we put the mez on, the wheat, the purple tips on the wheat from that restricted root growth, not nearly as purple. And by the way, about 30% more growth where we put that phosphorus on. Now remember, 10 pounds of nitrogen in the mez, so it might be a nitrogen response to the added growth, but the other side of that coin is we're way ahead this year, and it proves to me that we cannot look at calendar dates. Back in March, we talked about an early application of nitrogen and sulfur, and in this case, phosphorus was put on as well. Man, where we did that wheat looks so much better and so much more growth. It doesn't mean more yield. At this point, we don't know. But it's just amazing how much better that wheat looks with that early nitrogen. All right, a caller saying, Peter, you talked about nitrogen on forage triticale or forage rye. You said 200 pounds. Was that urea, 200 pounds of urea? Or perish the thought, 200 pounds of actual nitrogen? No, it's 200 pounds of actual nitrogen. Because if you get a big yield of forage and you want 18% protein, that takes 200 pounds of nitrogen. So when we talk about 100 or 120 pounds on rye, that's actual nitrogen, and it's not overkill. A caller saying, non-GMO corn, Peter, I've got bad weed pressure. What is the best herbicide? Oh, come on. I am not getting into that. There are tons of excellent corn herbicides that do not require glyphosate. So non-GMO corn, we can still get good weed control. But I will say that a 2-pass program and making sure you use a good soil-applied program up front, I think that's essential. Niels in Nova Scotia has chickweed and dandelion, and he's saying, I'm a strip-till corn guy. I want to add 2,4-D to my burn down, in with the glyphosate. What do you think of that process? We don't do that ahead of soybeans because of the negative impact on soybeans. Whoa, wait a minute. If you use 2,4-D ester ahead of soybeans, there's no real negative impact. I believe it's 7 days or 5 days on the label. We know we can go even closer than that. It has to be the ester formulation, so don't walk away from that one, Niels. And in terms of the corn, you back up and say, well, wait a minute. am I going to get better kill on the weeds that I have with the 2,4-D in? Because believe it or not, 2,4-D can antagonize glyphosate. If we're going to add the 2,4-D, that's good from multiple modes of action, but we probably have to increase the glyphosate rate to make sure that the glyphosate does its job. So I like adding it in. I would say I want 5 to 7 days. I don't want to get into the situation where we have any phyto from the 2,4-D. And corn's pretty tolerant of 2,4-D, but nonetheless, I want to play it safe. And I would use the ester formulation. Just make sure you need it in terms of the weeds you're going to kill. 2,4-D is not really good on chickweeds. Not going to help you there. It will help you on the dandelions. Spencer saying, Peter, I listened to a nitrogen session from the Ontario Ag Conference and really kind of said that high-speed discs might not be the best incorporation tool with nitrogen ahead of corn because you got to get the nitrogen in 2 inches deep. I'm using 40% ESN. I put all my nitrogen on up front. The balance is urea. Should I treat my urea with some nitrogen stabilizer because I'm incorporating that with a high-speed disc? You know, Spencer, I'm going to say, no, you don't need to treat it. The high-speed disc, it might not get that urea as deep as we would like it. But if you're working 2 inches deep, most of it will be in the top inch. The beauty of the high-speed disc is that it rides on the roller at the back. The roller at the back really does firm down the soil. If the soil is firm, generally speaking, we don't get those volatilization losses coming up through the soil. We would like it deeper, so if the soil is dry, run that high-speed disc maybe 3 inches deep just to get that fertilizer a bit deeper. But 40% ESN, that's protected. And so there's a whole bunch of other things that go into this, but I just don't think you need, it would be an unusual situation, let me put it that way, that you needed to stabilize the balance of your nitrogen. I'm way over time, and there's more stuff to talk about, but it'll have to wait till next week. That's it, that's all. On behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture, this is Wheat Pete with the word for Wednesday, April the 17th. Hey, happy National Soil Conservation Week. That's this week. Rethink your tillage as little as possible, and I'll be back to talk about that more next week. See you then.